There's a special kind of cruelty in hurting someone who trusted you completely. Not the obvious kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes wrapped in fake concern, polite smiles, and promises that sound beautiful right before they become another weapon. They knew where you were vulnerable because you showed them. You handed them the map, and instead of protecting the places you couldn't defend, they studied them. They watched you forgive things that should have ended everything. They watched you stay when walking away would have been easier. They learned exactly how much disrespect you would tolerate before finally saying enough. And every time you stayed quiet, they became a little more confident that there would never be consequences. That's what makes betrayal so twisted. It isn't just what they did. It's the fact that they knew what it would do to you and continued anyway. You spent nights replaying conversations, wondering what you missed. Maybe you were too trusting. Maybe you misunderstood their intentions. Maybe you were the problem. That's how the aftermath works. The person who caused the damage walks away with their story intact, while the person who was hurt is left interrogating every memory. But here's where the story changes. You don't have to become cruel because someone treated you cruelly. You don't have to spend your life planning revenge against people who already showed you exactly who they are. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to let their behavior become your personality. They wanted their actions to become your identity. They wanted you angry, bitter, suspicious of everyone, convinced that trust itself was a weakness. But that's giving them far too much power. They already took enough from you. They don't get to take your future too. What happened was wrong. What they did may have been deeply unfair, manipulative, or abusive. But your next chapter doesn't belong to them. Your healing doesn't need their apology. Your growth doesn't require their regret. Your peace doesn't need their permission. And the most uncomfortable thing for them to watch will not be your anger. It will be your ability to rebuild without becoming the person they tried to turn you into. Because nothing frustrates someone who wanted to break you more than watching you become stronger without becoming bitter, wiser without becoming cruel, and completely unwilling to hand them another piece of your life. There is something deeply disturbing about being hurt by someone who knew exactly where you were vulnerable. A stranger can insult you, and you might forget it by tomorrow. But when someone you've trusted learns your fears, your insecurities, your private struggles, and the things you never tell anyone else, then uses that knowledge against you, the damage feels different. It's not just pain. It's the realization that the person holding the knife knew exactly where to place it. They knew what made you anxious. They knew what you had survived. They knew which words would stay inside your head long after the conversation ended. They knew what you were trying to heal from, and instead of treating that knowledge with care, they turned it into ammunition. That's what makes betrayal so twisted. You didn't give them access because you were weak. You gave them access because you trusted them. You believed they were safe. You thought the things you shared would remain protected. You assumed vulnerability would create connection, instead of becoming a weapon someone could use when they became angry, jealous, resentful, or simply decided your feelings no longer mattered, and afterward, you start questioning everything. You replay old conversations. You analyze every strange moment. You wonder whether the warning signs were there from the beginning. You ask yourself how you could have missed them. Maybe you were too trusting. Maybe you ignored something obvious. Maybe you should have known better. That's the trap. You begin carrying responsibility for someone else's decision to hurt you. There's a difference between recognizing a mistake you made and accepting blame for another person's cruelty. You can admit that you trusted someone who didn't deserve it without deciding that trust itself was foolish. You can acknowledge that you ignored certain warning signs without turning the entire experience into evidence that you're incapable of making good decisions. People who intentionally exploit vulnerability often depend on confusion afterward. If they can make you question your own memory, your judgment, and your worth, they don't have to take responsibility for what they did. You become so busy investigating yourself that they disappear from the center of the story. Don't let them. Look at the situation clearly. Someone knowing your weakness doesn't give them permission to attack it. Someone knowing your past doesn't give them the right to weaponize it. Someone knowing how deeply you care doesn't give them permission to manipulate that care. Your openness wasn't the crime. Their misuse of it was the choice they made, and maybe that's the lesson you weren't expecting. You don't have to become suspicious of everyone just because one person violated your trust. You don't have to destroy your ability to love because someone treated your vulnerability carelessly. You simply become wiser about who gets access to the deeper parts of you. Not everyone deserves the full version of your story. Some people earn trust slowly. Some people reveal themselves through consistency. Some people talk beautifully, but behave terribly when circumstances change. Watch behavior, watch patterns. Watch what happens when they don't get what they want. Because the person who truly respects you will never need your vulnerability as a weapon, while the person who was secretly waiting for an opportunity to control you will eventually reveal themselves through the way they handle the parts of you that were never meant to be used against you. There is a strange punishment people put themselves through after betrayal. The person who caused the damage makes a choice, and somehow you become the one standing trial. You replay every conversation. You examine every decision. You wonder what you could have said differently, what you should have noticed earlier, what mistake you made that somehow gave another person permission to treat you badly. That's how guilt gets misplaced. You start carrying responsibility for behavior that never belonged to you. Maybe you trusted someone too quickly. Maybe you ignored warning signs. Maybe you gave too many chances. Fine, learn from that. Become wiser. Strengthen your boundaries. But don't confuse a lesson with a life sentence. You made a judgment about someone's character, and they revealed something about theirs. Those are two different things. You don't become responsible for someone's betrayal simply because you believe their promises. Think about how absurd it sounds when you say it out loud. Someone lies to you, and you blame yourself for believing them. Someone manipulates you, and you blame yourself for caring. Someone breaks your trust, and you decide the real problem was that you trusted at all. No, that's backwards. Your ability to trust wasn't permission for someone else to become dishonest. Your kindness wasn't an invitation for exploitation. Your loyalty didn't create their decision to betray you. People sometimes confuse self-reflection with self-destruction. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? Self-destruction asks, what's wrong with me? One makes you stronger. The other keeps you trapped. You need the first one. Look at the experience without turning it into a courtroom where you're always the defendant. Ask what the situation taught you. Maybe you learned that promises mean very little without consistent behavior. Maybe you discovered that boundaries need consequences. Maybe you realized that someone can say all the right words while their actions tell an entirely different story. Good. Take the lesson, leave the shame, because shame doesn't make you wiser. It makes you smaller. And that's exactly what betrayal can do if you let it. It convinces you that the safest version of yourself is the smallest version. Don't speak too openly. Don't trust anyone. Don't care too much. Don't get attached. Don't expect anything. Don't show weakness. Soon you're not protecting yourself anymore. You're imprisoning yourself. The person who hurt you doesn't deserve that much influence over the person you become. You can become more careful without becoming cold. You can develop stronger boundaries without building walls around your entire heart. You can learn to recognize manipulation without assuming everyone is manipulating you. You can become selective without becoming isolated. That's maturity, not pretending you never made mistakes, but refusing to turn your mistakes into proof that you are broken. The past can teach you without owning you. Maybe you should have walked away sooner. Maybe you ignored things because you wanted to believe the best about someone. Maybe you gave them another chance when the evidence already told you not to learn from it. But don't punish yourself forever for being human. They made their choices. You are responsible for what you do next. And what you do next can be very simple. Become wiser, protect your peace, strengthen your boundaries, stop chasing explanations from people committed to avoiding accountability, and refuse to spend another year carrying guilt that belongs to someone who made the decision to hurt you in the first place. Because their choices may explain what happened, but they do not get to define who you become from here forward. The easiest thing in the world, after being hurt, is becoming the thing that hurt you. Someone treats you with cruelty, and suddenly cruelty starts looking like protection. Someone lies to you, and you decide honesty is for fools. Someone betrays your trust, and you convince yourself that trusting anyone again would be stupidity. It's a tempting conclusion because bitterness feels powerful for a while. It gives pain a mask. It makes you believe you're finally in control. But there's a problem: you aren't in control when someone else's behavior determines the person you become. They hurt you once. Why let them continue hurting you by rewriting your entire personality? That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. The damage doesn't end with what happened. It continues if you allow the experience to become your identity. You start carrying their actions into relationships they never touched. You punish new people for old wounds. You assume every kind gesture has a hidden motive. You question everyone because one person taught you the wrong lesson about trust. That's not strength. That's the wound still speaking. Real strength looks different. It says, "What happened to me was wrong," but it doesn't get to decide what I become. You can acknowledge the damage without worshiping it. You can remember the lesson without living inside the memory. You can become more careful without becoming cruel. And yes, there is a difference between forgiveness and access. You don't have to invite someone back into your life to prove you've healed. You don't have to forget what happened. You don't have to pretend the betrayal didn't matter. You can forgive someone internally while keeping the door permanently closed. Now you can wish them peace from a distance while protecting your own peace up close. Boundaries aren't revenge. They're education. They teach people how to interact with you by showing them what happens when respect disappears. And sometimes the boundary is simple. You don't argue. You don't threaten. You don't announce it to everyone. You simply stop participating. That's powerful because bitterness needs an audience. It wants you constantly talking about what they did. It wants you checking their life. It wants you imagining their downfall. It wants you waking up angry because someone from your past still occupies space in your present. Don't give them that. Your energy is more valuable than your resentment. Build something with it. Use the pain to become more disciplined. Use disappointment to become more observant. Use betrayal to strengthen your standards. Let the experience teach you how to recognize consistency, accountability, and genuine character, but don't let it teach you to hate humanity. One dishonest person isn't proof that everyone is dishonest. One betrayal isn't evidence that every relationship will end badly. One manipulator doesn't represent every person who wants to know you. You can still love. You can still trust. You simply don't have to trust blindly anymore. That's growth. The strongest response to cruelty isn't becoming crueler. It's becoming wiser without losing your humanity. It's looking at the person who tried to change you through pain and refusing to give them that victory. They may have damaged your trust. They may have shaken your confidence. They may have left scars you didn't ask for, but they don't get to decide whether those scars turn you into someone bitter or someone stronger, someone who understands darkness without becoming a servant to it, someone who remembers what happened without allowing what happened to become the blueprint for every person they meet from this point forward. They took things from you that weren't physical. Your confidence, your peace, your ability to trust your own judgment. Maybe they made you question whether you were enough. Maybe they convinced you that your boundaries were unreasonable, your feelings were too much, or your expectations were somehow the problem. And after enough of that, you start walking around with invisible damage, wondering why everything feels heavier than it used to. That's what manipulation does when it works for too long. It doesn't just change the way you see another person. It changes the way you see yourself. You begin second, guessing simple decisions. You hesitate before speaking. You apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. You explain yourself to people who aren't even listening. You become afraid of disappointing everyone, because somewhere along the way, someone trained you to believe that your peace was less important than their comfort. But here's where the story changes. You can take your mind back not by pretending the damage never happened, not by forcing yourself to forget, not by waiting for the person who hurt you to finally understand what they did. You take yourself back through small decisions, your judgment again. You stop asking everyone whether you're allowed to have boundaries. You stop negotiating with people who repeatedly disrespect them. You stop measuring your worth through his ability to appreciate you. Not in one dramatic moment, you keep promises. Now, you keep promises to yourself. This to yourself. You make decisions based on your values instead of your fear. You learn to sit with discomfort without immediately running back to the person who caused it. You discover that being alone is sometimes healthier than being surrounded by people who constantly make you question your worth. And then something strange happens. You begin enjoying your own company. The silence that once felt empty starts feeling peaceful. You no longer need constant reassurance. You don't need someone texting you every hour to prove you're valued. You don't need an apology before allowing yourself to move forward. That's freedom. You don't wait for them to return what they took. You rebuild it piece by piece. Your confidence becomes stronger because now it's based on evidence. You've seen yourself survive difficult days. You've watched yourself walk away from situations you once thought you couldn't leave. You've learned that disappointment doesn't kill you. Rejection doesn't erase you. Losing someone doesn't mean you've lost yourself. Your boundaries become stronger because you've learned what happens when you ignore them, but your standards become clearer because you've experienced what happens when you accept less than you deserve. Your peace becomes valuable because you finally understand how expensive it was to keep giving little and then begins losing for the person who person the code of your illusion who the person who has a bill array that it's about becoming someone you never abandon again. Someone who knows their worth without demanding applause, protects their peace without feeling guilty, and refuses to hand over another piece of themselves simply because someone else hasn't learned how to treat what was given to them with care, respect, and responsibility. They probably expected you to stay broken. That's what people who hurt you often imagine. They assume the damage they caused will become permanent, that you'll spend years carrying their name inside, every disappointment, every relationship, every decision. They think their actions will become the final chapter because they can't imagine a version of you that exists beyond what they did. But healing has a strange way of humiliating that prediction. And don't heal to prove them wrong. You heal because you finally understand that your life is too valuable to remain trapped inside someone else's worst decision. At first, recovery doesn't look impressive. It's waking up without checking what they're doing. It's going through a day without replaying the same conversation. It's learning to enjoy things that used to feel impossible after everything happened. It's rebuilding trust in yourself before worrying about trusting anyone else. Nobody applauds those victories, but they matter one day. You realize you haven't thought about them for hours, then days, then weeks. The memory still exists, but it no longer controls the temperature of your entire life. That's when you know something has changed. The wound may have left a scar, but the scar is no longer running the person. And that's the answer they never expected, not revenge, not destruction, growth. You become calmer, more selective, more aware. You stop confusing attention with love. You stop confusing apologies with changed behavior. You stop accepting promises that aren't supported by actions. You become less impressed by words and more interested in consistency. That's what pain can teach when you refuse to let it make you bitter. You become harder to manipulate because you've learned the patterns. You recognize emotional games faster. You notice when someone is trying to make you feel guilty for having reasonable boundaries. You recognize the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who repeatedly makes the same mistake while expecting forgiveness to erase the consequences. You don't need to announce any of this. Your life becomes the announcement. People notice when you stop chasing. They notice when you stop explaining. They notice when your confidence no longer depends on whether they approve of you. Sometimes they even come back, curious about the person you've become, but by then, something important has changed. You aren't waiting for their return anymore. Their apology might come. It might not. Their regret might be real. It might be performance either way. Your healing cannot depend on it. That's the freedom they never planned for. They can regret what they did while you continue building your life. They can remember the version of you they hurt, while you become someone that version couldn't have imagined. They can tell their story, explain themselves, justify their behavior, or pretend none of it mattered. You don't have to participate. Your recovery speaks louder than their excuses. Every peaceful morning becomes evidence. Every healthy boundary becomes evidence. Every new achievement becomes evidence. Every time you choose yourself without guilt, you prove that the rest of your story, and maybe that's the most powerful transformation of needing them to suffer for you to feel whole. You stop needing the world to take your side. You simply keep becoming stronger without becoming cruel. Wiser without becoming more careful. Whiffle without it becoming passive. Because of the final ace or someone to try to break it. Peaceful, full, and how life so full of purpose. Especially with her down whole, full, muscle. So full nose. Full lies. Clarity, self-respect, and peace that what they did becomes part of your history instead of the definition of your future, leaving their actions behind as a lesson you survived rather than a sentence you were forced to keep serving forever.